Welcome back to the channel. Now it's been a little while and I was in two minds whether to release this video or not, but I've come to the conclusion I've not put any content out for over 3 months now, so I better get something out. So these pieces of plywood here are quality birch plywood, and this all came from some tooling at work that was being thrown out, and I thought it was too good to let it all go into the bin. Now originally my design was to stack the plywood something like this, so that you had a little bit of a pattern when you looked on it side on. However, when I laid them out like this on the table, I realised that it wouldn't be enough height for what I wanted. So in the end I just went for the good old fashioned stack them on top of each other look. And by doing it this way it gave me an overall height of over 500mm, which is what I was looking for right from the start. So obviously all these pieces of plywood are not going to stay together by themselves, so we need to move on to a glue up process. So whilst I'm gluing all this up, I'll explain what I'm trying to make here. I recently watched a TV documentary. They were in some sort of cave network system, and as they were walking around they walked past these cave columns, you know, the supports that hold up the roof of the caves. And some of them looked really impressive, where they've had thousands of years of water erosion. I thought to myself, I don't think I've ever seen a table with that type of base. Now there could be a pretty good reason why I've not seen anything with that type of base, but I really wanted to give it a go and see if I could make something that looked like one of these cave columns. So for the top and bottom of this table I do have a piece of birch plywood. It does have some holes in it because this is the packing material that the tooling comes in at work. So what I need to do now with this mechanical pencil and string is try and make some circles in between the holes that already exist on this plywood and see what the biggest circle is I can make without hitting any of the holes. I'm pretty sure I can get a reasonably sized circle out of it, but the only problem is I don't know how many other circles I can make that will form part of the table supports. Although this new jigsaw from AG is absolutely fantastic, there is no way that I would get a nice, perfect, crisp circle from it. So to get this perfect, crisp circle, we're going to use this circle cutting jig on the bandsaw. All I have to do is mark roughly in the centre of this piece of plywood, drill a hole in it, and then take it over to the jig where there's already a pin, which is a cut down nail, and then I can get this pin into the hole in the plywood and hopefully it should make a correct size circle. And if you're wondering how to make this jig, I've not got a video on how to make it, but there are plenty of videos out there that can show you how to make it. However, it is pretty simple to make yourself. And there we go, one lovely circle. Now using the bandsaw doesn't make the cleanest of cuts on the edge. So if you remember from a couple of videos back, I made myself a mini router table out of some scraps and offcuts that I found lying around. And learning my lesson from the last video where I probably didn't have the correct router bits, I purchased myself a spiral upcut flush bit. So I use that just to clean up the edges on these round pieces of plywood. So this round tabletop now looks a little bit square now it's flushed up. I know what you're thinking, how can a circle look like a square? Well, I'm not saying it looks like an actual square, I'm just saying the corners are a bit too squared. So in my little trim router I chucked in this chamfer bit. I'm going to go over the bottom part of the tabletop with a chamfer bit, and then I'm going to flip it over and go over the top bit with a little round over bit. And I think this would just add a little bit extra detail to the tabletop and stop a round tabletop looking square. Although it's not square, it's round. So I've got these three other discs of plywood that I've cut out, and these are going to form part of the base of the cave column. They need gluing up, and they need gluing up centrally. So the hole that I pre-drilled in them to cut them out on the bandsaw cutting jig, I'm going to put a nail through that hole. Then when the nail sticks out the other side, I'm going to put it into the hole I drilled in the other piece, and that way they should all line up pretty centrally. And then once I've got one lined up with the one below it, just pull the nail out and put it into the next one and line it up that way. Although I've made this up as I've gone along, it does actually seem to work. So I need to add a little bit of weight to these plywood discs, and I'll leave them overnight to glue up. So next day, and everything's glued up really well. So the next thing I need to do with these plywood blocks is to mark the centre on either end, drill them out with a little 3mm drill bit, and then add another cut down nail into the hole, and then I can line up those round circular plywood discs. I don't know what else to call them apart from round circular plywood discs, but it's getting annoying. Add them to the bottom and glue all them up. That way I know they'll all be aligned centrally as well. So again, a bit of glue on this column piece, and using the pin that I've put in the bottom, I can line it up with the disc on the top. So now when it comes to gluing all this up, I could chuck some weight on the top of it, but it's not the most sturdiest of structures as it stands at the minute. So I was a bit concerned that I might come back out later on and find it all collapsed on the floor. But they do always say that you should plan your glue ups. And whilst I think I got away with this one, I really should have planned in advance. And obviously, because I've only got this clamped up on the one side is compressed, whereas the other side wants to pop out. So I'm trying to hold everything together, get the second clamp on, and get that squeezed down tight before the whole thing just implodes all over me like one of those tricks in a box. Now it's time to get out the dual horses, and I've not used my dual horse for quite a number of years, which is quite evident by this dead snell that's clinging to the side. Now over on Amazon, I purchased a set of 4 of these carving discs. They're only cheap, so I don't expect them to last too long, and I don't really know how good a job they're going to do. They actually did a pretty good job, and I'll leave a link to them in the description box below if you're interested. So with the leg and base of this table clamped up, I can start about shaping these square pieces of plywood. The first objective is just to get them into a round shape. Now these pieces of plywood are longer than they are in width, so I could spend absolutely hours trying to carve these pieces of plywood into a perfect cylindrical shape, but just for now I'm going to carve it into an oval shape from top to bottom. So after about 10-15 minutes of the angle grinder, I managed to get a rough shape of what I wanted. So now I need to mark on the shape of how I want to carve away this cave column support to make it look like it's had thousands of years of water erosion. And in hindsight, which is a wonderful thing now, I really should have referred back to some pictures, but I'm just doing this from memory. So using this attachment on the angle grinder wasn't too bad to carve out these shallow grooves. I think what would have made it a little bit easier is if I bought a bowl carving attachment. Now I got to this stage and I was gonna blend in these shallow grooves a little bit more. I just decided I didn't like the shape of it. I then went back to the drawing board and marked on some different shapes. And then I could set about carving out those new shapes, and then I could also start blending in the discs into the shapes that I want. This is probably where the project started to go a little bit wrong, because as I said, I didn't use any pictures to refer to, and I got a little bit carried away with the carving. So on this bit here, I'm using a 120 grit flap disc, and this actually worked really well. You had to be a little bit gentle as you first applied the flap disc to the plywood because it left some little marks in it, but on the whole I was able to really refine the shape. So I was out in the garage last night doing a bit of tidying up, packing some stuff away, and I noticed a little bit of a problem with the table. Now I was looking at this table and it's quite thin in the middle, and I didn't know how strong it would be, so I thought I'd give it a go at trying to break it. And it came apart where the plywood pieces were glued up together. I don't think it'd be too hard to repair. I've got 2 options. I can either just glue it back together with some different glue, or I can drill out the middle of this bit and drill out the middle of this bit, and then I can stick a rod between the two, joining them together using some of the polyurethane expanding glue. So although I'm using a engineer's square here to try and drill the hole straight and square, I didn't take into account that the fact that the surface that I'm drilling into might not be flat. Now I use that method to drill out both ends of the table, And when I come to put them together, although I knew I didn't drill the holes deep enough, I just wanted to make sure that they were aligned. I could see straight away with this metal rod that there was no way the two halves were going to line up. So I went to using a hardwood dowel. And the good thing about using a hardwood dowel is that it does have enough flex in it that I can make the two bits join together flush just by adding a little bit of pressure to the join during the glue up. Now this video was filmed back when we had a cold snap in the UK, so this polyurethane glue has gone a little bit hard. So it did take quite a bit of time for me to actually manage to squeeze enough out of the bottle. Future me though, however, will remember this, and next time I want to use a polyurethane glue, I'll take it in the night before and warm it up in the house. Now after wrestling with the clamps and getting 4 of the clamps on, I also had to check that the table was gluing up straight, but I left it to glue up and watch the polyurethane glue go off hard. So whilst I left the polyurethane glue to go off, there are some black laser cut divots, we can call them, in this plywood, and they are showing on the side of this cave column leg. I decided to mix up some plywood dust into the glue and I'll fill these into the holes to try and eradicate them. Now this is the first pass of sanding and this was quite awkward to sand. I think I was starting off with 120 grit here and it probably took me a good 45 minutes to get this to somewhere near where I was satisfied enough that I could move up to the next grit. And of course with awkward angles there's always some hand sanding involved. But there were a few awkward places I couldn't get to with the orbital sander, and then I remembered I have this AEG Omni-Tool multi-tool and I've never used the sanding attachment on it, the Delta sanding attachment that is. So I thought what better project than to try it out for the first time in the 6-7 years I've owned it and see how good the sander is. And actually to my amazement it did a really good job. And after I finished using the multi-tool for sanding, I progressed up to 240 grit. Then it was time to add the proper tabletop and the table base to this thing. And although the whole reason of me doing this was to prototype to see if I could make something like this, I'm starting to think at this point it's probably not worth carrying on, but I want to see the finished thing all together just to see how bad an idea this potentially is. And again, I used the pin method to line up the top and bottom parts of this table. So at this point, I stood back and admired the table, and I don't actually think it's looking too bad. The next stage of this table build would have been to add some sort of wood dye or some colour of some sort. But when I added some weight to the top of the table to help the glue, you can see there's just too much play and bend in this table. No need to adjust the volume. After all these years of making videos, I forgot to turn the microphone on. Now I can't quite remember what I'm trying to say, but basically I'm trying to say that I've given up on this project now. It's a little bit too thin in the middle and there's just too much wobble in it. And if I apply a little bit of pressure like this, it broke off really easily, which is a massive shame because I've put loads of hours of work into it and now all it's fit for is the skip. I like the idea. I'll definitely come back and revisit it sometime in the future, maybe with some hardwood. Anyway, there we go. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching and I'll see you again in the next one.